Okay, so are you ready to dive into some Chicago history?
Mm-hmm.
You know Chicago, right? Ever wonder how it got the nickname the Windy City?
Oh, yeah.
Get ready, because today's deep dive into Chicago's history is going to surprise you.
Mm.
It's a lot wilder than you might think.
Yeah, it really is.
It's just from glancing at the Wikipedia article on Chicago's history.
Right.
It's a story of ambition and reinvention,
Absolutely.
and maybe a few questionable choices along the way.
Absolutely. We're working with the Wikipedia article on Chicago's history, and let me tell you, the city's story is anything but simple.
I bet. And it all starts, believe it or not, with wild garlic.
Wild garlic.
Wait,
Yeah.
wild garlic. Okay, now I need to hear more.
Right. So Chicago is thought to come from Chicago, a Miami, Illinois word, meaning, you guessed it, wild garlic.
Really?
It was apparently growing everywhere back in the day.
Wow, so Chicago. The big onion, but make it garlic.
Exactly.
Really?
And while the exact meaning is debated, it highlights something crucial. Long before European settlers arrived, this land was already a hub of activity.
Yeah.
For Native American tribes, we're talking about the Miami, the Mascoutin, the Potawatomi.
Yeah, the article mentioned there was a lot of competition for this particular piece of land.
And for good reason, Chicago's location was incredibly strategic. It served as this critical link between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River system.
Wow.
Whoever controlled the Chicago portage controlled a massive trade network.
Right.
So this idea of Chicago being a bustling center, it's been baked in for centuries.
I never thought about it like that, but it makes total sense.
Yeah.
It was destined to be a crossroads.
Absolutely. And speaking of crossroads, one of the most fascinating figures in early Chicago is Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable.
Yes, Chicago's very first non-native settler.
Yes, he built a trading post around 1788, right where the Chicago River meets Lake Michigan. But here's where it gets really interesting. Well, du Sable was a black man of French and African descent.
Wow, that really challenges the traditional narrative of who settled the West,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
Yeah.
You don't often hear about pioneers who look like du Sable.
It's true. His story complicates the picture we often have of westward expansion.
Yeah.
And it speaks volumes about the diversity that existed in early Chicago, even if it's often been overlooked.
Totally. It makes you wonder how different things might have been if his story was more widely known.
Right. Exactly. But even with du Sable there, Chicago was still a tiny blip on the map. It took the arrival of a different group of entrepreneurs in the 1830s to really kickstart the city's growth.
Yeah.
These Yankee entrepreneurs, as the article calls them,
Right.
saw the potential of Chicago's location and were ready to cash in.
It's always about location, 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 right?
Yeah.
And they were sitting on prime real estate. What did they do to really get things moving?
They capitalized on every opportunity. The opening of the Erie Canal, the completion of the Illinois and Michigan Canal in 1848, suddenly Chicago was connected to the East Coast and the rest of the country in a way that was unimaginable before.
Right.
And then, of course, came the railroads.
It's like a recipe for explosive growth. Was Chicago ready for that kind of rapid expansion?
That's a great question. On one hand, Chicago was perfectly positioned to become a major hub, but on the other, that rapid growth brought its own set of challenges. The city was ill-equipped to handle the influx of people, and sanitation was a major issue. And then, of course, there was the Great Chicago Fire.
Ah, the fire. It's hard to talk about Chicago's history without mentioning that.
It was a turning point, that's for sure. In 1871, the fire ripped through the city, fueled by the very things that had made Chicago a boomtown. Its wooden buildings, densely packed streets, and lack of adequate infrastructure.
Wow. It's just hard to imagine a whole city going up in flames like that. What was the aftermath like?
Oh, it was devastating, of course, but what's fascinating is how Chicago reacted.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have been easy to just rebuild the same way, you know, but the fire kind of forced them to rethink everything, and it led to stricter building codes, innovations, and fire safety,
Right.
and ultimately paved the way for the rise of the skyscraper.
So from the ashes of tragedy came architectural innovation.
Exactly.
Very Chicago, I'd say. But the article mentioned another challenge early Chicago faced. One that's almost comical to think about now, mud.
Ah, yes, Chicago's mud problem.
Mud problem.
Remember how we talked about location, location, location?
Right.
Well, that prime real estate turned out to be, well, a bit swampy.
Swampy in what way?
Chicago was basically built on marshland, so every spring when the snow melted, the streets turned into rivers of mud.
Hold on, it gets that bad. Like horses can't walk down the street bad.
Worse, actually, the article mentions these signs people would post. Warning of the worst mud pits things like, no bottom here, or shortest rate to China.
Oh my gosh.
Imagine trying to navigate that on your morning commute.
I would have loved to see that.
Right.
Though I guess people weren't laughing about it at the time. It sounds like a public health nightmare waiting to happen.
Absolutely. Not to mention the logistical nightmare.
Right.
It was hindering transportation, trade, everything.
Okay.
So what does Chicago do? They decided to literally lift the city out of the mud.
Wait, they lifted the whole city. How is that even possible?
It's incredible. They used thousands of jack screws to slowly raise entire buildings and even streetcar lines a few feet at a time. Then they'd lay down a foundation of cobblestones, brick, and eventually a sewer system.
Talk about a can-do spirit. Like, they look at a muddy swamp and said, yeah, we can build a major city here,
Exactly.
which I guess they did.
And that same can-do spirit is what fueled Chicago's industrial boom.
Totally.
We all know about the Union stockyards and Chicago's reputation as the hog butcher for the world, but that's just one piece of the puzzle.
So what else was cooking in this city of innovators and problem solvers?
Everything. This was a city of makers, shippers, and advertisers. Take Montgomery Ward and Sears, for example.
Weren't those massive department stores?
They were, but they started as catalog companies in Chicago.
Oh, right.
They capitalized on the city's incredible rail network and central location to ship goods all over the country.
Ah, so they were like the Amazon of their day, dominating the mail order game.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about the products. Chicago was also a pioneer in the world of advertising.
Oh, right. The article mentioned a guy named Albert Lasker. What was his claim to fame?
Albert Lasker is often called the father of modern advertising, and he built his empire right here in Chicago.
So those catchy jingles we all know and love,
Yeah.
Lasker's doing.
Maybe not jingles, but Lasker understood the psychology of selling.
Okay.
He moved away from simply listing facts about a product and started tapping into emotions, desires, and creating a need in the consumer's mind techniques that are still used today.
So Chicago wasn't just producing goods, it was producing desire.
Exactly.
That's fascinating. But I know from the article that not everything was booming industries and clever marketing. There are some darker chapters in Chicago's story.
That's right. The rapid growth, the influx of immigrants, the struggles between labor and capital, it all led to some significant social unrest.
Yeah, it's like all that rapid change and progress created this tinderbox.
Yeah.
Was there one event that really exemplified these tensions?
The Haymarket Affair in 1886 was a major turning point.
Yeah.
It began as a peaceful labor demonstration, but when a bomb exploded, chaos erupted.
Right.
The aftermath was brutal, with police cracking down on protesters and this wave of anti-labor sentiment sweeping the city.
And the article really highlights how this event became like a rallying cry for the labor movement.
Oh, absolutely.
And not just in Chicago, but around the world.
Yeah.
It's incredible to think that something that happened over a century ago still resonates today.
Right. It's a stark reminder that the fight for workers' rights has been long and hard-fought.
Yeah, for sure.
And speaking of long and hard-fought, we can't talk about Chicago's tumultuous past without mentioning Prohibition.
Oh, yes, the 1920s in Chicago. Gangsters, bootleggers, jazz illegal speakeasies. It's practically a genre unto itself.
Right, and for good reason. Prohibition, as you know, made it illegal to produce or sell alcohol. But in a city like Chicago, with its history of defying expectations, well, people found ways around the law.
Of course, and no one represents that defiance quite like Al Capone.
Exactly. Capone's rise to power during this period is fascinating because it speaks to these broader social tensions of the time.
Yeah.
You had this massive influx of immigrants, many struggling to find their footing,
Yeah.
and a government that seemed incredibly out of touch with the realities on the ground.
Yeah.
It created a perfect storm for organized crime to flourish.
Wow. It's like a history lesson and a crime drama all rolled into one. So we've got labor struggles, a booming black market. What else was happening in Chicago during this period?
Well, remember the Great Migration we touched on earlier. Hundreds of thousands of African Americans are moving to northern cities like Chicago, hoping for a better life.
Right.
But this massive demographic shift also led to increased competition for jobs and housing, which exacerbated racial tensions.
And sadly, those tensions boiled over in 1919 with the Chicago race riot.
Yeah.
A horrific event sparked by an incident at a segregated beach.
It's a tragic reminder that even as Chicago was reinventing itself, it was still grappling with this deeply ingrained racism and inequality.
Right.
The fight for civil rights and social justice is woven into the very fabric of Chicago's history.
Yeah, so where does that leave us with Chicago today? Yeah, after fires, mud, gangsters, social upheaval, it feels like this city has weathered it all.
It has. It's a city that embraces its history, warts and all, and that willingness to confront confront its past, to learn from its mistakes, is perhaps what makes Chicago so resilient.
That's a great point.
It's a city constantly in flux, constantly reinventing itself, always striving to live up to its motto, I will.
I will. That's a powerful statement.
Yeah,
And it makes you wonder what will define Chicago in the 21st century.
right.
What stories are still waiting to be told? It's clear that beneath the surface of this vibrant city lies a history as deep and complex as the Chicago River itself.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for joining me on this incredible deep dive. It's definitely given me a whole new perspective on the Windy City.
It was my pleasure. There's always something new to discover about Chicago, even for those of us who thought we knew its story.
Thank you for listening. If you love history, don't forget to subscribe to History with Bree and Peter. Join us for more fascinating stories from the past. Hit that subscribe button and never miss an episode.